This is an overview of the sprinkler system at 2735 Westwood Boulevard. So starting with the controller panel, I left the manual for this in a binder with a bunch of other manuals, so if you have questions about that, it's in the manual. Here's how it's wired up. There are 4 zones. It can do 6, but only 4 are necessary for this yard. I'll talk about where these wires disappear to later. Right now they just go down through this wall and somehow make it to the crawl space. I'm not actually sure how they get from here to the crawl space. But yeah, zone 1, 2, 3, 4. At this end, 1 is red, 2 is green, 3 is white, and 4 is blue. At the other end, that becomes red becomes orange, green becomes green, white becomes yellow, and blue becomes blue. Because there's a junction box where they change colors, which is weird, but that's how it is. And other white is common or ground. Right now the rain sensor is just jumpered, so there's no rain sensor installed, but you could install one if you wanted to. So let's go look at the sprinkler box next. All right, here's the sprinkler box. It really needs a proper cover, but it's been under this weathered piece of wood forever, which seems to work fine. Here's the valves and backflow preventer. So the house feeds water into the system here. Goes down to the valves. That is 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 is unused, permanently disconnected. 5 used to go to the zero-scaped area over by the shed. It was rocks. I made it mulch because the rocks were all ruined, packed with dirt. So that just doesn't need a sprinkler zone. The lines for 5 are they're still buried. They're just packed with dirt. Over by the shed, they're like the tops of the sprinkler heads are more than a foot underground. I dug them up once, so they're way buried. That area's been regraded more than once, I think. So each of these valves has 3 positions, so you can force it all the way off or force it all the way on. Here, let me force 4 all the way on. And that will always turn the sprinkler on, regardless of what the controller in the garage is doing. And then there's a mid position between on and off that's off unless the controller tells it to be on. So to allow the control panel in the garage to control these, you have to have it in that middle position. So it says a quarter turn. What I usually do is just turn it till it starts to make noise, and back it off just enough. Then you know it's right on the edge of being on, and the controller will have control of turning those on and off. Here's the wires that came from the control panel in the garage. You can see the colors are different, so red became orange, white became yellow, blue became blue, green became green. So I'll show you the junction box where those colors switch over, and other white is ground, and all the grounds from the valves are just bundled up here. And the previous owner ran some spare wires, so if you wanted to use these for another zone or for a rain sensor, these loose wires are just available for future use. Okay, so backflow preventer, I'll talk about that more when I talk about winterizing it. So let's look at the junction box in the crawl space. So that is way over there behind the furnace. So let's head over that way. The junction box is in that corner. All right, here it is. This is kind of a rat's nest. The previous owner did this. I labeled it, but here's yellow becoming white, orange becoming red, blue is blue, green is green, ground is ground. These are hooked up but not used, I believe. It's a little confusing. So there's one big wire coming from the box to this junction box, and 2 little wires going out. So I think he had not enough of that and a whole bunch of this. So he folded this in half and just ran it, cut it here and ran it 2 lines in parallel. So there's about as many wires in here as there are inside here. So thus the big tangle of connections here. And it's confusing because there's duplicate colors in here. So for example, one of the sprinkler zones is white and the ground is also white. That's because of the way this got done. And that disappears up there and somehow makes it to the garage. No idea how. So that's this junction. And just to follow up on that, these cut wires are one end of those unused connections I just showed by the junction box. And here's the other end. All right, I can tell you everything I know about where these lines are buried. I've dug up a couple of them to repair areas that got damaged. There's five lines going out. Of course, the one is unused. The other 4 come out of the box at this angle and wrap around in a shallow curve over to that gate. One of them splits off somewhere, not quite sure where, and does this this circle for the backyard. So for the backyard, there's one there, one there, and then one here by the fence, and one over in that corner. The other 3 lines go right underneath this gate. There's a retaining wall, and there's like a second brace of bricks underneath this one, and there's a gap between 2 of the bricks, and all 3 of those lines come through that gap. I spent a summer, maybe 2020, digging all this up and repairing crushed lines because of this tree, which I love, but is the mortal enemy of those 3 sprinkler lines because they were run way too close to this tree. So that tree had just weaseled roots right through that exact same gap, which had grown and was just crushing at least 2 of those lines. So that's all dug up and fixed. Hopefully everything I've done to kind of repair the damage the tree did over the last 10 years will last for at least another 10 years, maybe 15. So those 3 lines run through this walkway. One goes right past that bush to curve around to the front yard by the driveway, zone 1, and one goes kind of through the middle of this mulch past those rocks, and that goes to the far front yard out by this corner, which is zone 2, and then the third one kind of has a more angle to the right that goes over here somewhere. I haven't dug that one up, and that's for zone 3, which is just 3 sprinklers kind of close to this tree, and then the backyard is zone 4. So zone 3, the first sprinkler was right here because the previous owner had a bunch of flowers and stuff in here. I ended up, well, there's one iris survived, but everything else I just zero-scaped because it was growing weeds, or mulched anyway. So that is capped off. If you wanted to put flowers here, that'd be the guy. And then zone 3 is also this guy, that guy, and that guy. These sprinklers with the green tops are probably the older ones in the system, so they might need to be replaced the soonest. It's kind of normal to replace 1 or 2 every season. All right, zone 2 is the far front yard. That's that one by these rocks. This guy sticking up by the tree. And then there's 2 along the sidewalk. And then zone 1. There's one by the mailbox. Alongside the driveway, another one inside this planter bed, and a central one here by this bush. Zone 1 also has a capped off riser over here underneath this rock. This area has been so completely dead for so long, I think because of just the acidity of these needles dropping from this huge bush. I didn't bother trying to save that spot. I just capped it off to save water. This one by the house is also zone 1. And underneath, this is the first one of zone 1. It starts out here and then curves around, kind of going from there to there to there. So in this one, the line is not actually buried there. The line is buried along the edge of this kind of rock wall area. And then there's a T-junction right about here by this push that goes off to feed that sprinkler at the corner. So those are the 4 sprinkler zones. All right, so for winterizing this in the fall, I kind of winterize it in 2 phases. Just Colorado weather will tend to go in and out of too cold for the sprinkler system, but then too hot again for the grass to survive. So too cold is applies to this guy first because he's above ground. The water is going to freeze in here way before it freezes in the buried lines. They can go down to, I don't know, mid-20s overnight. They'll be fine. You don't necessarily want to run the sprinklers themselves while it's freezing, but you don't need to blow the whole system out if it's just sort of oscillating back and forth around freezing. But this guy, if it's 25 degrees overnight, he will freeze. So, and I've had that happen before. What happens is the little plastic insert inside the backflow preventer will kind of get lifted up by the ice, and then it doesn't work quite right. You got to take this cap off and you can kind of tap it back down. I'm sure that decreases the life. I did replace this once around 2017, I think, because the old one didn't have a blowout valve. It had like a weird port that the guy I hired didn't even know what to do with. So I replaced this. Now I can blow it out myself with an air compressor. But yeah, for winterizing this, when it's sort of just a soft freeze, mid-20s overnight, I'll just drain the water out of this above ground pipe. And then if I need to, I can flood water back into it again if the next week is hot. The way you do that is to drain it from 2 places. So there's a drain plug inside the crawl space, and then there's a freeze drain right there, that yellow guy. So to start with, you shut off all water to the system here, this white valve. And then there's a little drain plug right there. He's getting a little goobered up. I usually have to use a pair of pliers to get that off and then on again tight enough to not leak. So the idea is you shut off the water here, you open that drain plug. It won't actually drain because there's suction in the line. You gotta open. Let's see if I can get a better view. One of these screws, that guy. So if you open either of these, it will let air into the system, and that'll let the water just drain into a bucket through that drain in the crawl space. At the same time, by letting air into here, it's going to allow all the water to drain out that freeze drain. Once the pressure's off of that, it kind of opens up automatically and will just dribble into the box. So I don't think it matters if you open or close these valves for that process. Let's see, so that will get you through the first part of the fall, and then once you're ready to completely winterize it for the winter, you go through all those steps, and then you also have to blow out the 4 lines. So to do that, you have to close this valve and open that valve. So you close this guy because you don't want to be blowing air back into the house. Of course, if the valve is closed down there, it wouldn't matter too much. It'll just escape through that freeze drain. But yeah, close that, open that, leave these 2 smaller ones closed briefly while you close all but 1 of these valves manually. So you'll turn 3 of them all the way off, 1 of them all the way on. At least that's what I do because my air compressor doesn't do nearly enough volume at once to blow out all 4 at the same time. So with 1 open, you can hook an air compressor up to this quick connect. I don't know why I chose this one. I think it could connect to either one, but that's where I got it. And then the last thing you do is just open up that valve with a short flathead screwdriver. and that will release air through that one sprinkler line. Sometimes I have to recharge the compressor and do it multiple times, which is good. The professional I hired one time said that's how he does it. You blow out all the water once, and then you let it rest for a second, and the water will sort of pool in the lowest spot of that line, and then you blow it out again, because after the water's sort of resituated, it seals the line again and will catch the air and blow through. So I'll usually do kind of 2 blasts of air through each line, and of course as you go through each one, you just close the one you did, open another one. And yeah, that's pretty much it for winterizing. I think I missed something. PSI, that's what I missed. So, I don't know, I found resources online that said 60 PSI, 80 PSI for your air compressor to blow out a sprinkler line. What I found is that doesn't cause this to close correctly. I have to go up to more like 100 or maybe even 120. But basically if you blow air into this and this thing just starts chattering like crazy, making an awful noise and nothing happens, it's because the air going through didn't have enough pressure to close. There's like a diaphragm in here that has to close, and then all the air will go past. It's easier for the water to close this just because it's thicker, but the air, you got to get enough PSI to kind of pop that closed, and then once it's caught, everything will go through. I've even dumped water into this to kind of get it jump started, but as long as the PSI is high enough, it should just close. Yeah. And then in the spring, to set it all back up again, put all 4 of these to that mid position just before they're turned on, forced on manually, so the controller box in the garage can control them. And then it's just reverse steps. You close both these, open both of these, recap the drain plug in the crawl space, and open that white valve in the crawl space last. And then it should be good to go. You can test each zone. It'll blow a bunch of air out. And yeah, like I said, usually when you bring it up in the spring, it's kind of normal to have 1 or 2 sprinkler heads that's not doing great, and I'll just replace them. There's kind of a mix of 1/2 inch and 3/4 inch sprinkler heads, like the threaded inlet on the sprinkler heads. So yeah, make sure you check, if you're going to replace one, make sure you check to see which kind it is, just to make sure you're getting the right one. You can adapt them, or you can change the riser to be all 1/2 inch. Would be the best thing. So I didn't get around to making them all consistent. So I think that's it for the sprinkler system itself. Oh, and real quick about the rain sensor. So I'm running this without a rain sensor right now. The previous owner had one, but it was just absolutely crumbling. It was probably from the 90s. And their original controller box didn't have an input for a rain sensor. So what they did was patched it right into this ground wire. So it would be like putting a light switch in the middle of that white ground. And when it's raining, the switch is open. When it's not raining, the switch is closed. So that way the sprinkler system doesn't run when you've recently gotten rain. Because all the ground returns from these valves, have no, the return is broken back to the box. So that's sort of the, I think, redneck way of patching in a rain sensor when your controller doesn't support one. However, this control panel does support one, so that's that jumper wire I showed. You could either run a line somewhere from this side of the house straight to the box, or you could run a line to the sprinkler box and use one of these unused wires to get it from the sprinkler box back to the control panel, which might be easier. That way you could install the rain sensor on the edge of the roof in the backyard. So if you wanted to get fancy and use a rain sensor, you could. Otherwise, we usually just turn it off temporarily when it's raining. And here's a box of stuff I'm leaving. Some of this was from the previous owner that I found useful. Lightly used sprinkler head, some other just bits and pieces. If you wanted to switch out the little valves that are in the mouth of the sprinkler head, whatever these are called, there's all the spares from the ones I bought in the past. Anyway, bunches of insert connectors and risers and different stuff. I also have this 1-inch PVC line. The previous owner left this for me too. A couple nice big pieces of it. So the next time, hopefully not for another decade or so, the next time that tree destroys some sprinkler lines and you need to do a patch, this is just laying around. So yeah, I think that's it. I'll put my email in the description of this video. If you have any questions, feel free to send them on over to me. Thanks.